Okay, now we're going.
Yes.
So, hello everybody. My name is Keith Gordon. I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about a lot of different things, mainly U.S. real estate investing. I want to thank Kelly and Anthony for inviting me out here. Right off the hop, I'd like to say that I'm not your normal presenter. I don't really have a set bunch of slides or a standard presentation or anything like that, so feel free to ask questions at any point in time. In fact, here, I'm going to do this so I can better see questions in the back of the room. In any case, so who am I? Well, Keith is a pretty interesting guy, but just like everybody else here, everybody's unique in their own way. I enjoy playing soccer. A couple of my friends that I play soccer with in Burlington are actually here. So there's me in my soccer stuff. This is me doing CrossFit, which is one of those crazy exercise things. That was Halloween. That wasn't a regular night out. At one of my best friend's weddings, and of course climbing some rocks in the States, oddly enough. So that's my tie into the U.S. That picture was taken in the States. But also we want to talk about sort of like what's the career path that I was on to get to being a full-time real estate investor. Well, first off, I'm from Winnipeg originally. I moved out here. Originally, I went to London, so just down the road, in 1991-92 to do my audio engineering degree. And I was actually just at my alma mater of 20 years ago, fitting earplugs to the current generation of audio engineers so that they would be able to protect their hearing. Went back to Winnipeg, worked as a sound tech full-time, worked for the Manitoba Legislature, recording the Premier and the rest of the politicians. And eventually, after a lot of years doing that, I got bored and I thought I would look for the next challenge. The next challenge turned out to be doing my MBA. So I came back out to Ontario and I went to Toronto. I went to the Schulich School of Business and I did my MBA. And that led me to work in this area. I lived in Burlington and I worked with Matthew and I worked with Charles at a company called Genum in Burlington. And I later moved to Hamilton, up on just off the link there, and I was also I moved back to Oakville after I was done working at Genum. So I've spent a lot of time in this neck of the woods. I know a lot of the areas around here. I've played soccer against people from Paris and Brantford, and played soccer in Soccer World in Hamilton all the time. So I know this neck of the woods. And now, how did I get into the real estate side of things? Well, the real estate, just down the road here, talking about Robert Kiyosaki and Rich Dad education and that. Well, back in, I guess it's got to be about 5 years ago now, I heard the radio ad for the free evening come and hear about Robert Kiyosaki and real estate investing. And that was at the Sheraton Hotel in Hamilton there. And so I went down there and I did 3 hours and I sat in a room not dissimilar from this one, and I sat there. I've done a bunch of different things in my life, and I'd even read, Wealthy Barber and Rich Dad Poor Dad. But in that room that night, the light bulb went off. I'm like, it makes so much sense. Why did somebody tell me this like 20 years ago? Crap, right? So I signed up, and I signed up to do the Rich Dad Tiger, the beginning intro one that was like 3 days long. And I paid for it myself, and I called up my best friend. Oddly enough, the guy who I'm staying with in Cambridge tonight. Called him up, and he came along with me, and he was, my best friend in the whole world, known him since high school, but he was closed-minded. He was like, nope, this is all a scam. And he was convinced it was a scam because he went on the internet, and he did a bunch of research, and it must be true then. So for him, there was just no winning him over. He had pre-decided that it wasn't right for him. So that was fine, and I met a nice lady there whose husband was of the same opinion as my best friend. So the two of us were like, well, both of us have nobody else to do with it. Let's sign up, and we took our whack of Rich Dad Tiger courses, and we did them together. Now, unfortunately, though, she was with a husband that didn't want to do real estate, so she never really got over that threshold, and I had like a best friend that was closed-minded, didn't know how to do real estate, and I'm not married, and I didn't have a sibling that was, you know, my only sister's back in Winnipeg, and, you know, married and school teacher and kids, and she's not gonna do real estate, and my father had passed away, and, you know, my mother is very much not into doing real estate, so I had like no one to do it with. So I'm like, well, around this time the US was melting down, I should really learn about US real estate. So I went and I took a bunch of courses through Robert Allen, who was actually a Canadian from Montreal, but he was big in the US, and he is EWI, Enlightened Wealth Institute. So I signed up, I took my tax return, and I went and I signed up for a mentorship, you know, in Las Vegas, and I did a full year of like all across the US, going to all these different real estate courses. And I thought, you know, I'm not scared to get started in real estate, I just need more education. Yeah, I think somebody was in denial there a lot. So then after a full year of doing all this stuff in the States, taking all these classes, making a lot of great friends, great experience, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's nothing wrong with education. I think education is, you know, it's the silver bullet. But I was still in denial. I just thought, you know, I'm a book smart guy, right? I've got, you know, undergraduate degree in Winnipeg, engineering degree, MBA. It's like I'll just get a real estate degree now. It's like on to degree number 4. It's crazy. And I even go back to my MBA school, and I went back to Schulich, and turned out that, like, I didn't know at the time, but we had a bunch of like property courses in real estate development. A lot of the real estate developers have done their business degrees there. So I take some courses with Schulich. I go see Steve Martell. I go see Fortune Builders, Stan Merrill. I was like, I'm taking all these courses, and I haven't bought any property. I haven't actually taken any action. So, you know, so the key for me, it turned out, you know, was I needed to have a partner. I needed to have somebody to do it with, somebody to hold me accountable. In this case, the biggest one was my friend Al. Now, my friend Al, I'm a sound tech. I've mixed a lot of bands. Al and I did a lot of gigs together. He was a guitar player and a keyboard player and a singer. And I would go see him when I was like barely old enough to be in the clubs. And then we did a house gig together, you know, 5 years, night in, night out, 6 nights a week. Al and myself, you know, I'm mixing him, he's up on stage. And he'd talk to us. He'd talk to the other guys in the band. Hey, it's Saturday night. Who wants to come collect rent with me? What do you mean? It's 2 in the morning. And why do you have that baseball bat? And he goes, yeah, I'm going down to the rough parts of town. You know, the checks just came out today, and if I don't get them, people will drink the money away by Monday morning. So it's like, oh, okay, that's what you mean by collecting rent. Okay, you're dealing with some of the rougher elements in town. But in any case, Al's been doing this since he was a teenager. He started out buying $1,000 houses in downtown Winnipeg, in the worst parts of town. And he knew I wanted to get in this, and I talked to him every time I was back in Winnipeg. So even when I was living in Toronto, I'd go home for Christmas, I'd go home in summer vacation, and I'd see Al, we'd do a gig together, I'd talk to him about real estate. So finally, I'm out there, you know, we're at a Bomber game, and he's like, Keith, got offered this deal. He goes, but I'm taking the wife and kids, and we're about to leave on a round the world vacation. We're taking the kids out of school for a year. We're going to Australia, New Zealand. We're going to Thailand and Philippines and Asia, and then we're going to end up in Europe. But we're going to be gone. And he goes, but this guy offered me this deal. There's 4 properties that are being foreclosed on, and I was offered like the underlying note, but now we're just going to end up with the properties. I'll do the deal if you come and partner with me on it. Otherwise, I'm just going to let it go, and we'll just go and we'll live off the revenue from my hundreds of other rental properties. I'm like, well, what's this going to cost me? He goes, well, probably legal fees would be about 10 grand. I look and I go, well, I've spent, you know, where I spent, let's see, I spent $36,000 there, and $20,000 there, some other stuff. It's like, you know, and he's offering me a chance to buy 40 doors, 4 buildings, 40 doors for 10 grand. Yeah, I'm in. So that was sort of, and my friends Matthew and Charles know this, I was going to move back to Winnipeg, but suddenly I had to move in a bit of a rush. And it was because he was leaving on Halloween, and somebody had to take over running these places that we were pretty much going to assume ownership on October 15th. He was leaving October 30th. So suddenly, I went from 0 to 41 doors, in the blink of an eye, and I had about 2 weeks to learn how to do it before my friend left the country. And it's not like he's going to be on his phone, right? It's like this is someone that I can email. We also like to tell stories about things that go wrong. Well, having your trusted group of power team. So at the time, Al had a handyman who'd been working for him for 13 years. This guy was like really good. These were all kind of rougher neighborhood properties. These were mainly rooming houses or apartments that were like in rougher parts of town, but the cash flowed great. The thing was that I didn't know anything about this. I mean, I had taken property management courses. I hadn't done it. I hadn't dealt with these people, and I certainly can't swing a hammer to save my life. I'm not the guy you want fixing the toilet. I'm not the guy you want fixing the electrical system. So this handyman, he's going to be my right-hand man, so to speak. He's going to be the one responsible for dealing with like a lot of the stuff that I don't know, and it's like I'll be responsible for. I'm good with the money and the accounting and all the business school type stuff, and that's fine. And do marketing, I can find tenants and I can meet people and talk to people. I'm good with people, but there's a lot of intricacies of this that I don't know. So he's going to be my partner in this. Well, Al gets on the plane. I'm getting there shortly thereafter, and we've obviously got November 1st rents. Now our handyman is collecting our November 1 rents that are not coming from the government via check. 2/3 of them come via check, and we've got a rent roll of, I don't remember, somewhere north of like 12 grand in rents coming in. About 4 grand of that is cash. Our handyman apparently collects 4 grand in cash and then decides after 13 years of working for my partner that crack is a better idea than working for my partner. And he literally goes off the deep end. Like, we lose him to drugs. He lives in my partner's building. He works for my partner. He drives my partner's truck. He uses my partner's cell phone, and he is employed using my partner's tools. Instead, he decides that none of that matters, and he'd rather do drugs. So that was my introduction to the business, was that I literally lost the guy who was supposed to help me do this. The very first month's rent, because remember, we bought all this property and it was financed 100%. Like, it was like, here's my 10 grand for legal fees, but there's no money in the company. The company is like based on like, we need the rent that comes in every month to pay the bills. So the first month, we're missing 1/3 of the money to pay the bills. We no longer have the guy who can fix the toilets, and I'm on my own. And that was trial by fire. That was being thrown in at the deep end. So I had to go out there and I had to actually find other property managers, people who had actually experience in doing this. But luckily, networking, I'm telling the world about my problems, and a friend of mine who plays keyboards goes, oh, I know somebody, and so-and-so, there's a husband and wife, and they do this sort of thing, and they've turned around a bunch of downtown buildings, and they're really good. So I ended up like getting them to work with me, and we kind of held things together while I was out of the country. And then, he got back and, was able to like then mentor me through the rest of it. Talking about the States, I've got one of my friends from business school and one of the guys from EWI, Robert Allen. So I'm sure that everyone takes courses, but there are people that you just click with. And Kyle was one of those guys. Kyle lives in Minneapolis. That's sort of why I, do my U.S. real estate investing there. And then I've got other people, friends of mine that are all invested with me, joint venture partners, and then lots of trusted members of the power team. So, talking about these places, you want to see how bad it can get. Well, this is Pritchard. That's 4 units. Those don't actually have windows there in the porch, and see the plywood on the door there. This is Austin. This is a 7-unit rooming house. Backyard's all cut up, and there's a pit bull that lives back there. And I for real, This is 186 Austin. That's a 9-unit house, 1 bathroom. you can legally have in Winnipeg up to 10 people living in a property with one bathroom. There was theoretically a shower in the basement, but it was like more like a pipe coming out of a wall and a sewer hole. And the toilet I wouldn't wish on anybody. So, I mean, there was one good washroom, and then there was the basement. And in the end, we ended up like boarding up the basement door and all that kind of disaster. And then this is Fountain. Fountain to this day, like I was in Fountain just the other day. But Fountain, I'll tell you, it's again right down in the core of Winnipeg. My very first trip, when Al and I were looking at potentially buying the place, Saturday afternoon, bright sunny. It's actually a day much like in the picture there, and I was scared to go in the place. I'm scared to go in this place on a Saturday afternoon with my 6'3" partner, right? And we had to cross a police line. In that unit right there, that was also that unit right there, someone had a guest in from out of town, and they had a drug party, and someone had overdosed and died. So we had to cross a police line as we were checking out the property before we bought it. Within 2 months, I'm in that place, 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, with thousands of dollars of cash on me, and I'm by myself. Because it just, all that matters is like, you know, knowing the place. Now I know what the neighborhood is. I know everybody that lives there. I've gotten to know them. They're, you know, for the most part, harmless people. You know, they're good people, but, you know, things change. Things change very quickly. It took 60 days for my, you know, fear to go away. So, after all that disaster, of course, with all those rooming houses, I start looking for like, well, what to do next? Al's out of the country, so we're not really doing anything else. We're, you know, I'm handling that on a daily basis in Winnipeg, but where do I really want to be investing? Well, the whole reason why I took those EWI Robert Allen courses was just that. I was looking at the U.S. The post-meltdown pricing was nationwide. So when people say, well, why do you want to be in the U.S.? When the U.S. system collapsed, everything went down everywhere, regardless of whether it made sense or not. Prices went down, they went down everywhere. They went down more in some places and less in other places, but they went down everywhere, and it often did not relate to a lot of the other fundamentals. And some of the markets still had strong fundamentals. Places that were close to where I lived, places that I went to concerts and football games and hockey games. Minneapolis in my case, because it was just south of Winnipeg. There were places that are close to you, places like Rochester, New York. Again, it was, you know, and I have friends who are invested from Toronto who are invested in Rochester. You get the car and drive to Rochester. Take you 3 hours, but you're there. You don't have to get on a plane, and it's got strong fundamentals. The employment situation is high. You know, you don't have like, you know, high rates of unemployment, you have high rates of employment. The economy is diverse. There isn't one employer like, you know, in a place like Detroit or, you know, where you're reliant on one sector to be strong. The rents are very high in certain places. Minneapolis had very high rents. The rents did not go down. The rents in 2006, 2007 were the same. In fact, they probably went up slightly after the meltdown. Odd as that may seem, the rents would actually go up because as people were being displaced from their homes, out of home ownership, they're actually strengthening the rental market. So as a landlord, if I'm looking to buy and hold property, I'm actually finding that the rents have actually gone up. You know, bonus for me, the purchase prices have fallen and the rents have gone up. That's a perfect situation for getting into investing in long-term hold properties. And of course, the vacancy rates, as more people move out of ownership, they're going to drive those vacancy rates down. So that's why I looked at, you know, the U.S. and said, yeah, this just makes sense. Now, where was I going to go? I already mentioned, you know, that there's like places like Minneapolis that were good. You know, I did take a trip to Vegas. I went down there with actually a few years before we actually did all of this stuff with Al. He and I and another partner of his, we'd actually gone to Vegas and Phoenix to look at stuff. Al's other partner bought a place, and the view is pretty much this view. Like, he bought a place on the Strip, but he bought it for the right reasons. He was already a multi-millionaire, had a lot of businesses. He bought a cheap condo on the Strip on Vegas for himself. He wasn't buying it for a rental or an investment, he just bought it for him. But I didn't want to go to Vegas, and I'll tell you that Vegas is, you know, essentially it's tourism, it's gambling, and I've been to Vegas a lot of times when I was in the corporate world for trade shows. But I think that all three of those elements, they're just three legs of the same stool. It's all related to, sort of people going to Vegas and spending money. So their economy is based on, you know, people going to Vegas. And I think that Vegas is a lagging city in terms of an economic indicator. You're talking about lagging indicators. So when New York is more successful, and there are companies with head offices in New York, they'll eventually spend more money to go to put trade shows on in Las Vegas. When the people who live in New York are doing better in their jobs and are making higher wages, they'll go to Vegas more to gamble. And, you know, when families in New York are doing better, they will then take their families on vacation to Las Vegas. But New York has to be doing better first for Las Vegas to do better. So I think that Las Vegas is always going to be one of the last cities to recover. And because it's so predominantly focused in that one sector, I just didn't see Vegas as being a good place to be, despite the purchase prices being low. They had also built out a lot, so there was a lot of vacancy, and there just wasn't that diversity. Now the same thing, when we took our first Rich Dad course in Hamilton with Mark Rousseau, Mark had just come back from Detroit where he had literally bought city blocks with his credit card. And that's great, but Detroit right now is a city where the infrastructure, the physical structure of Detroit was built to house 2 million people. And right now, the population of Detroit has fallen below that of Winnipeg. And Winnipeg is, you know, probably in around 750,000. So the property may be very, very, very well priced in Detroit, but the trouble is that you're going to look at, you know, you're always going to have a really, really, really bad vacancy rate, right? Because, you know, when there's 2 houses for every person, they can always go and find a better rental property than your rental property. So you're never going to be able to get a substantive rental rate. And as a buy and hold investor, that just means Detroit. I don't care if Detroit is, the houses are priced at $10 each. I don't want them. You know, that's just me. So I looked at Minneapolis and I said, this is the right one for me. It's close. I don't need to get on an airplane. I can get in the car, and I'm in Minneapolis. You know, it's very similar to where I live in Winnipeg. It's Canadian. They have cold winters. They have kind of, you know, but they have that kind of friendly Canadian thing. There isn't a real cultural difference the way that you might see a cultural difference, say, if you went to Texas, right, where it's a lot more Spanish influence and that sort of thing. And just people are different in Texas. It's more like Alberta. Another good thing, though, talking about red zones and ghettos, I mean, you're talking about me who live in a, you know, who has all those rooming house properties. They're essentially in a ghetto in Winnipeg. Minneapolis has less ghetto area than Winnipeg does. It's got less red zones. It's got less areas where the banks are going to say, no, I don't want to go there. You can't buy this property and get financing if you're there. I'm not aware of anywhere in Minneapolis that the banks in Minneapolis won't lend on. I can draw you on a map of Winnipeg, lots of places where they won't lend on, and not all the property I own that's in those areas. So, yeah, there's a lot of them. But the final one, and this one, you know, I put it last, but really it's the critical one. Kyle was there. Kyle's been investing in real estate much like Al had. He's a trusted partner. His dad started him out when he went to college. Instead of having Kyle live in a dorm room in a frat house or whatever when Kyle went to university, his dad said, no, you're going to learn real estate. We're going to buy you a house. You're going to pay for this house by putting 5 or 6 of your friends in there, and you're going to have to manage the house, and you're going to earn your keep by being the property manager. And that's how you're going to learn real estate. You're going to be the landlord to all your friends. And when you guys go and have a party on Saturday night and you want to break a bunch of windows, just remember it's coming out of your pocket, not mine. So Kyle learned real estate the hard way. We met on these EWI courses, we hit it off, and he wanted to do more stuff. He had reached his wall. He had as much as he could in his IRA, and he had as much as he could in his wife's IRA, and he had as much as he could. And he had a couple of joint venture partners and the one guy, and they had like 20 properties together, and he had as much as he could with him. So he was tapping out in the like mid-20s, and he was like, Keith, we should do something together. And I was like, Kyle, we should do something together. So we brought in my friend John, whose cousin lived in Minneapolis, and so he and I did our schooling together, and we started, putting a structure together. And so we looked at structures, and we're like, well, if we're going to be Canadians investing in the U.S., we want to protect ourselves, because we know that the lawyers down there will work on contingency. And it's all well and good if you're going to own a vacation property in a warm area yourself and let your friends use it or rent it to your friends. But if you're actually going to go out there and rent it as an investment to Americans, you have to be aware of what the American lawyers, will do to you. The slip and fall was, I heard a number that was as much as 94% of all tort law, which is the whole lawsuit, personal injury stuff, takes place in the U.S. U.S. is what, 4% of the world's population? They got 94% of the slip and fall lawsuits. Yeah. So, little preface here, I'm not a lawyer. I've talked to a ton of them. I'm not an accountant. I've talked to a ton of them. I wasn't going to fill my slides with a whole bunch of like, so here's my lawyers and all that kind of stuff. But my cards are at the back, my cards are at the front. If anybody wants to know like who I've used for attorneys, who I've used for accountants, who I've spoken to, I'll share all that information. It's way more than I can, I could talk for, the next week on all this stuff. I spent a year of my life, researching the crap out of it to learn all this stuff. You talk to 5 different lawyers, you get 5 different opinions. So I then had to figure out from those 5 opinions somewhere in between. So we went through sole proprietorships. We went through the various levels of partnerships. Generals, limiteds, limited liabilities. We went through the different corporations. There's lots of information out there. The C corporation would be the equivalent to our Canadian corporations, our Ontario Numbered Corp, or Manitoba Corp, that sort of thing. The S corp is a flow-through entity. What that means is, say you're a dentist or a doctor and you have your own little dental practice. The money that your dental practice makes doesn't necessarily have to, you don't necessarily want it to pay taxes. You can just have it flow through into your personal taxes as, Keith Gordon, doctor of dentistry. So that entity does not exist in Canada. The one at the bottom there, you'll hear a lot of folks talk about investing in the US. A lot of Americans will use the LLC. LLC just stands for Limited Liability Company. It's a very simple structure. It's like a corporation, but with like a lot fewer rules. It's a lot cheaper to get. It's a lot cheaper to file. A lot less onerous restrictions on the paperwork. The only trouble is, well, it's a flow-through entity as well. And Canada, our CRA, does not recognize flow-through entities. So if you ever hear about double taxation, if you're investing in the US and you're going to get double taxed, if you put your stuff just in an LLC and have it flow through to your person, your Canadian person, you're going to pay tax down there to the IRS, and then the CRA is going to still want the full boat on the tax, on the money you made in the US. All of it. Just the way it is. So you have to at least do something else to recognize from the accounting standpoint. So the LLC is good to protect you from the legal standpoint, but it's not going to protect you from the double taxation. And then there's also things that you can get into with trusts if you have children, if you want to do succession planning, if you want kids not to be able to access money, say, until they're 25, or be able to sell off properties. Or you can even, if you really want to be a controlling parent, you can even set up trusts that they can't even sell off the properties. Long after you're gone, your kids will still get a check every month, but they still can't get to the principal, and it's going to be kept at arm's length by your designated lawyer. So you can control your kids beyond the grave. In any case, so Steve Martell does a course, real estate investing in the U.S. for Canadians. And he talked about going to Deloitte & Touche, the big accounting firm, and spending $35,000 to have a structure set up that was relatively complex. And if you signed up for Steve's program with him and spent I think it was $35,000, he would give you this $22,000 structure, you know, as part of your sign-up costs. Well, the structure, and the interesting is I took this course after I had already done all the setting of my own stuff up. I was pretty happy that I came out pretty close to what Steve had come up with, and John and I had spent about $8,500 plus our time, so our time had to be factored in that. But we spent about $8,500 in legal fees to get to what he had said, you know, cost $22,000. So, not too bad. Is that the next slide? No, it's not. Okay. There is the brain explode slide coming up here. But yeah, I was already mentioning you have to avoid paying taxes twice from liability. You are going to get sued if you're in the U.S. It's just going to happen. If you're going to buy and hold, it'll happen sooner or later. So we used entity structures. That was number one. The next one was we isolate our assets. So the properties that we have in the U.S., we're going to have a separate LLC once we get to a certain amount of equity. So if we've got a $100,000 house, we'll put that in one LLC. And then if we have, you know, another $100,000 house, we'll put that in a separate one because that's about as much equity as we want to expose to the world. If we buy 3 condos and each of them's only $35,000, well, maybe we'll leave 3 of them inside one. So it's, you know, but we have our threshold. Our partnership, we decided our threshold's about $100,000. We also have, of course, liability insurance. That's, you know, just pretty much you want to have that, just like fire insurance down there. It's pretty much a given. But the other one is strategic mortgages. I'll show you when I get to the diagram, but I can essentially buy a property down there with 100% cash. Then I'll take one of my own entities and I'll write a mortgage on it. Then that entity will make a mortgage payment back to my own entity. Now, why would you be doing something like that? If you're familiar with the U.S., there's a lot more public information down there with things regarding, say, who the mortgagee is and how much they owe. Good lawyer, good contingency lawyer, he has one of my tenants slips and falls, one of my tenants wants to sue me. They can go and get a lawyer on contingency to go and look at my property, see how much I owe on it, see what the mortgage is. Now, if that mortgage is there, was filed from my own entity, they're not going to be able to get that much information. They're not going to figure out that my partner John and I own 2 entities up the chain. You know, they're not going to be able to figure out who that mortgagee is. What they're going to see is, oh, this property is worth $100,000, but it's got a $95,000 mortgage on it. Gee, there's only like $5,000 in equity here. And the lawyer is going to go, well, that's not worth my time. Let's go somewhere else. And so that's being strategic with your mortgages. It prevents you from having to employ your liability insurance. It prevents you from having to, you know, rely on these other aspects. So that's just being, you know, smart planning. And then you also have to worry about how to actually move your money north. Now, I haven't got into a lot of this yet because we agreed that we're going to keep all of our money redeployed. We're rolling everything back into the States for a minimum of the next 5 years. You know, as long as stuff down in the States is cheap, we're going to keep, you know, we're going to leave all our money down there. None of us need the money to live on. But we plan on basically growing it as fast as we can so that 10 or 15 years from now, we don't have to do anything else. However, we are set up. We do have our structures. We do have our bank accounts up here so that we can gradually move money up via likely the dividend method. So, this is what I didn't want to start out with. This is the head explode part. When I talked about talking to all those lawyers and all those accountants, this is sort of what we arrived at. So this is me. I'm in Winnipeg. I have a Manitoba corporation. My good friend John from the MBA program, he is in Ontario. He lives in Toronto. I'm going to be staying with him later in the week. He's got an Ontario corporation. Now, in the US, in the state of Minnesota, we have a limited liability partnership. And it is formed between, not Keith and John. No, it's formed between the Manitoba Corp and the Ontario Corp. They have a limited liability partnership. Now, this is the only difference from Steve Martel's setup, is that he actually uses a C corporation. our lawyer advised us that we didn't need something that complicated because of basically the expense involved and the reporting structures involved for what we were doing, and that was an example of talking to the people, talking to your advisors. He said it's not necessary. Now there's my friend Kyle. Kyle is an American. He lives in Minneapolis. He has a limited liability company. That's fine for Kyle. Kyle's good with that flow-through structure. The limited liability partnership is a recognized entity by the CRA. So taxes that this entity pays are credited towards taxes that this corporation and this corporation pay, so that we are not going to be stuck with double taxation. It was in fact the simplest, cheapest entity structure that was recognized by the tax treaty. Now over here, Kyle's limited liability company and our LLP then jointly own another limited liability company. I didn't put the whole numbers in here, but it's 50-50 into here. Now it's 70-30 into here. We basically did that to keep it slightly, you know, pretty much around the third, but if we were getting the 66 and 2/3, 33 and a third, it was getting complicated. So this is now where our ultimate partnership is. This is where the three guys have our partnership. That limited liability company, and it's okay that it's flow through. It flows through into somebody who can benefit from the flow through, and it flows through into an entity that pays taxes, which is then credited for those taxes in the country where the ultimate owners live. So we're okay with having the LLC down here as long as it's under the limited liability partnership. And then finally, we actually have this limited liability company, and it owns these three entities, these three properties down here. So that's actually, you know, the names of the properties. So they are technically supposed to be drawn within it, but it was like, you know, it was late and there was only so much I could do with PowerPoint. So forgive me for that one. These three actual properties are inside the limited liability company. Together they add up to approximately $100,000 in equity. We bought those properties all cash. There was no financing on them. So we've sort of hit our threshold for where we want to be. The next one, this limited liability company will then open another LLC to begin acquiring the next group of properties. So, just to give you an example of, well, why did I go to the States? Why did I buy this stuff? So this is our first property. It's a condo we bought. Strawberry Commons. Nice blue-collar neighborhood. Parking lot is full of trucks, but the trucks are all guys who own plumbing, heating, electrical businesses. They're auto mechanics, they're good people, good incomes. You know, nice tile bathrooms. You know, that's the living room. French doors. It's a one bedroom, but you know, it's a nice place. There's the exterior. It's a large complex, 130 units or thereabouts. Everybody's got a garage. Every unit comes with a garage. You know, and this is for 22 grand. When I was first introduced to this place in 2010, I wish I had an American Express black card because they were selling for 12 grand. And there was probably 20 for sale out of that 100, and I could have bought a fifth of the complex with one credit card back then. Our next house was Penn Avenue. This is just a one-bedroom house. It's nothing fancy, you know, decent flooring, you know, nothing exciting in the kitchen, nothing exciting in the bathroom, you know, but it's 30 grand. You know, this was our next house, Kofax. It's a nicer place, a little bit more money, you know, but tree, it's got a garage, you know, it's hardwood floors now this time around. You know, kitchens maybe, you know, depending on your preference, about the same. The thing is that each one of these places rents for between $900 and $1,000 a month. So, you know, my 40 grand might get me, 40 grand would be a down payment, right? On an investor property in this neck of the woods. I mean, shoot, 40 grand, 20% down, that's not even gonna buy me that much house, you know, and I've managed to buy $1,000 a month in rent, and the cash flow portion of that is probably $600. So $600 cash flow off 40 grand. I mean, my repayments pretty quick. And and that's why we're buying as much as we possibly can down there.
Your property values will be going up at the same time?
Yeah.
They wouldn't be at market.
No, and this is the thing that's very annoying. This this complex back here. Like I said, 3 years ago I was looking at these places for 12. Now they're 22. There's nothing at 22 now. I mean, we've been putting offers in at 30, 35, and getting countered and getting rejected for the same units, right? I mean, the prices are going up because the lending is starting to come back to the people that live there. As I said, there was no reason for Minneapolis to be down. Their jobs stayed the same. I mean, their unemployment rate's below 5%. It's lower than Winnipeg's. Their incomes are high. Their rents are high. There was no reason for it except that the lending stopped because the whole system shut down in the States. As the system begins to get back into it, as they begin to lend money back out to the people that live there, that work there, you know, the properties are going up and up and up in price. You know, I wish I had millions of dollars because I would have pulled the trigger in 2010. It didn't matter to me. People were saying, well, what happens if this $12,000 condo goes down?
Hello?
Do I care? I don't care. I don't care if they're all worth $1 and I have to pay. If I had to pay 10 grand for each one of those condos, and you told me that tomorrow they'd be worth $1 each, and I was going to lose $9,000 and $999,000, I wouldn't care, because I also knew that they were renting for $900 a month, and with $230 in condo fees and $11 in insurance. Like my insurance is $11 a month. So
Property taxes are low as well.
yeah, well, and that's actually rolled into my 235 HOA.
Yeah, it was.
So it was like, yeah, that was a $600 a month cash flow. So I'd take as many as I could. I'm upset the meltdown is over. I want it to stay longer. I need more time to raise more money. Yes, Ed.
Sorry, Keith, question. There's been a growing number of comments on the news and different websites regarding the meltdown may start to happen again within the next year or two because of the 5-year refinancing part from 5 years ago when it really happened.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a sort of semi-meltdown again. Any real credibility to that because you've got more information than I've got?
Oh yeah, no, that makes total. It makes total sense that we'll have like almost like the baby boom and then the echo boom.
Yes.
We had the bust and we'll have the baby bust. We'll have the echo from that. There's also supposed to be, if you look at the long-term cycles, there's also the commercial one that's, you know, the commercial meltdown coming as those lenders were locked in on a different schedule. So it's a different cycle that commercial was on. And I'm hoping that that comes along. I'd say probably give me about 2 years to be ready to start buying those like 50-unit buildings, you know. But I want that to happen too, because it's just a buying opportunity if you think of it in terms of cash flow.
It's good I have your card. I'll keep in touch.
Yeah. So that was that's the stuff that we've got. We're obviously like Kofax. We only got this one a couple months ago. Just finished the reno. It's rented out now. But I mean, we're writing offers like crazy. There's just not the inventory is not there anymore. That's the heartbreaking part. I mean, there are still deals, but man, are we having to work for them? You know. So
You got to find the right pockets of places.
yeah.
And there are places where there's a lot of deals. Still,
Yeah, and we want to
not
stay.
quite as good rents, but.
We want to stay where Kyle can still get
Yeah.
to them. So we want to stay in the greater Minneapolis area. And so along those lines, because we've been buying all cash, I've now started flipping in. I've started flipping in Winnipeg, just because I'm there. Al is back from his round the world trip. He's flipped hundreds of properties in his life. His wife works. His kids are in school. What's he going to do with himself? So Al and Keith are out flipping houses. And I know that wasn't really the point of my topic, but I wanted to like sort of speak to you, the folks that are here, that, you know, I found a strategy that worked for me in the US. And because I've been buying with all cash, and I'll tell you about the US lending situation first. when Al and I first went down to Vegas and Phoenix that time, where his partner Todd bought that condo in Vegas, Al bought 6 houses in Phoenix. He wrote 300 offers to buy 6 houses. Phoenix was starting to already heat up at that point. He had sold his primary residence because he was about to leave for a world trip for a year. So he talked his wife into selling their house. And then he also sold one big investment property. And so he went down there with 600 grand in his pocket and he spent it. Bought 6 houses. But that was all cash. And we talked to a lot of lenders, and you're talking about, we're going in to meet bankers, and the guy has $600,000, $600,000 check in his pocket, and nobody will lend to him, because this is 2010, and this is at the height of the banking freakout after the meltdown 08, 09, and nobody's talking to anybody. The best we can do by 2011 is there are commercial lenders out there that if we want to get together this portfolio of $1 million, they'll lend to us 65%. So Al's like, well, what if I buy $1 million in property and then we'll talk. And ultimately that bank went out of business. So, and it was impossible. I networked and networked and networked, and I was on the phone and I talked to 20 different banks in Phoenix that I was told were all investor friendly, that were all real estate focused, and none of them would do any deals. And then it was, things have started to lighten up in Minneapolis, and there are 3 banks down there that are real estate investor friendly, and they will in fact now finally start talking about lending on properties that the owners are not occupying. Because that was always the big one. Hey, you can get a house, sure, we'll lend you, you're gonna live in it, right? No. Well, then we won't lend you. And we're Canadians, so that was another deal. How can we get after you? What's our recourse against a Canadian? We don't know how to. A lot of these banks are small. They're not like TD and Scotiabank. They're far more similar to your credit unions. There's a staff of 30 people. There's nobody on their staff that knows how to go after somebody who lives in another country if they default on their mortgage, or if they have a renter in there that's wrecking the house and owner's absent. Yes, Ed?
Question for you and your friend Al. He's got that 600 grand in his pocket.
Yeah.
But you said the bank went under not long after you. So say he would have done all that with the bank and it goes under. What happens to his stability financially?
Well, if he was like leveraged to the hilt on those,
Kind of, yeah.
yeah, he'd have to dump,
Yeah.
he'd have to dump, if he had done what we were planning on doing, yank 2/3 of his money out. So commercial lending, commercial ratios, 65%. He would have taken 65% of his money out, bought, taken 6 properties and basically made it 18 properties. He would have been forced then to turn around and sell 12 of them. And if he was having to sell them distressed, chances are he had to sell 15 to get enough money to cover. So yeah, he could have gotten hosed.
So here I guess the point is, how can you, as an investor, with that situation in mind, guard against a weak bank structure there?
Well, interestingly, I go in to talk to a banker in Minneapolis. And it's the first time I've ever had this, because I've only been used to dealing with bankers in Canada, where we come in to the banker. Please. And we come in literally genuflecting and saying, here's all my financial stuff and I have good credit, and like the ladies were saying, is like you have to be presenting so much to your A-level lenders. To walk into a bank, have the guy, and I hand him my card, and up here it's like, I've had an MBA for 10 years. It wasn't really like that big a deal. The one thing I would say it's useful for is impressing American bankers. It's like, crap, the guy's like, MBA, wow, that's impressive. So our bank has $400 million to lend right now, and we just got bought by this state bank, and we're about to have $2 billion for, and it's like the guy's trying to sell me a car, right? It's like, it was a really nice feeling to finally have somebody try and sell me. So yeah, how you guard against it is you actually ask the questions of the bank. How many branches do you have? How much do you have? What's your portfolio? What type of properties are you lending on? So you actually interview the bank, and you come at them from a position of strength. And it's a very different feeling from how we normally deal with up here, where obviously no one here would think about worrying about TD going under. You know, is that hole too big to fill? And you wouldn't think about down there Wells or well, maybe, you know,
Chase.
up until the meltdown, we wouldn't think of Wells or a
Chase Manhattan,
Citigroup,
all that.
Chase Manhattan going under. Now we have to actually take that a little bit seriously, but it's easier to deal with when you're dealing with a state bank in Minnesota. And the nice thing about State Bank of Minnesota, or even a smaller bank than that, is that, you know, I'm dealing with a bank that's got 3 branches, and I'm looking to buy a property just over there. Guy who works at the bank drives just over there, and he lives just over there, and they care about that. So, yeah, if I find the right bank, it's actually going to be a right situation. It's going to be win-win. They actually want to see me buying a dilapidated home, buying a foreclosure, a place that's possibly boarded up, or was bank owned, or had a bad renter in it and is beat down. They want to see me go in there, renovate it, and put a nice, stabilize the
Sure.
situation. So it can actually work really well. You're right. You have to actually protect yourself. You don't just borrow money from anyone that will lend it to you. It's an interesting situation that we would never think of as Canadians, but you do have to be aware of that in the States. Don't just take money just because they're willing to give it to you.
Okay, thanks.
You know? So anyway, that was like what I found in the States, was that they weren't willing to lend. Eventually, this last time I was in talking to the banks in the spring in Minneapolis, they are willing to now start lending to Canadians who have entities. So the long dark winter is over. As of, you know, the last 4 or 5 months, they will now lend to people like us who go down there and set up a corporation and a structure and protect ourselves against liability and taxes, and we want to buy property. And now there are some banks at the local level that will talk to people like us. The one thing being, you're still going to need to put a personal guarantee on it. Now, the reason we haven't actually refinanced our Minneapolis properties is one of my partners, John, is conservative and doesn't want to put a personal guarantee on that. So he's willing to wait for our properties to season and get HELOCs on them. And that's fine with me. I mean, you know, we have to wait a little bit longer. And a HELOC meaning a home equity line of credit. So once our properties, we've owned them for a long enough period of time to meet the bank stipulations, they'll give us a line of credit on it instead of doing a refinance. That means that it's based on the value of the property, and we won't get quite as much money, but it means there's no recourse against us, the owners. So if anything were to happen, if we were to default on it, their only recourse was against the property. Yes, Karen?
Do you know what the normal length of time is for seasoning to be able to do that?
Depends on the lender who you're dealing with. We dealt with Wells because Kyle traveled a lot for business and liked to have a Wells that he could pop into to do closing, to do his banking anywhere in the U.S. And at the time, Wells actually, there was a Wells just down the street from where I worked in Mississauga when we were setting all this up. Shortly thereafter, Wells, kind of all their branches shut down. Wells pulled out of Canada. But seasoning was with them a year. You know, and it was a year of rent returns and a year of everything. So at this point in time, we have one property that's at a year. We have another one that's almost at a year, and then Kofax. Well, obviously, we still got about 6 months to go on that one. So I had it 6. The other thing was just given the small amounts of money. I mean, we bought all cash. These places were frankly inexpensive. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to go out there and, you know, do a 50% HELOC on a $22,000 house. It's like it's 11 grand, right?
Yeah.
You know, but when we can do all 3 of them, plus as the values keep going up too, that $22,000 condo is going to be a $40,000 condo pretty quick, and we'll be able to pull out all of the money that we put into it. You know, but it was just a case of, you know, waiting for the, you know, right time. And also too, it's like John's a busy guy. He's working, you know, RBC Global Insurance. I'm flipping 7 houses in Winnipeg simultaneously. It's like, good Lord, like there's not a lot of time necessarily to be on the phone. So sometimes the US stuff gets pushed to the back burner to deal with getting this $500,000 house on the market, you know, in Winnipeg, so I can make some more money, so I can buy some more stuff with cash. Yeah, so.
And meanwhile, they're sending you $900 a month.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I feel guilty, but I hadn't checked my Wells Fargo online bank account in a long time, and I looked, I was like, oh crap, I've got a lot of money in there. It's like, I've got almost enough money to buy half a condo now. It's like, and it's just been building up. And I mean, when we bought Kofax, bought Kofax, we were like down to like nothing. Like we tapped out that account again to buy. So as it builds up, as soon as it gets to the level, we'll start writing more offers and we'll buy another one. It's sort of been it's been slow and self-sustaining. I mean, I know we could ramp things up. We could get more joint venture partners. We could get RSP mortgages. These are all on my list of things to do. But I'm human, and you know, stuff doesn't always get prioritized how it should. Yeah, and I mean, I know a lot of you out there, it's the same thing. You'll be like competing priorities, day jobs, all these different things, and it's hard necessarily sometimes to get started or to take the next step. If you want to go into the US, it can be really daunting unless you just go out and buy something in your own name. You know, or you can even try flipping a house in the States, but then you have to rely on contractors and distance, and we talk about horror stories. There's some nice people that I met on a course in Los Angeles. They had a property in Indianapolis that they had bought sight unseen off the web, and they were willing to sell it to me. They had just had they had the renovations done, and for some reason they were just like, they were out of it. They were sick of it. They'd had all kinds of contractor problems, and they were willing to sell it to me 100% financed. They'd carry the whole thing. They'll just do a VTB 100%. I had another friend, Michael, who was flipping houses in Indianapolis. So I'm like, Michael, let's go to Indianapolis. Let me know next time you're going. So I get on a plane and I go out there with him, and we go to this place in Indianapolis, and it's not a great neighborhood. It's a bit of a dead end. It's kind of right down by Indianapolis Speedway, and it's kind of blocked off. You can only get into it from like 2 directions, and it was kind of like the neighborhood. The houses we're in weren't bad, but you had to go through a real rough part of town to get there. So that was already like a bad feeling, and Michael's like, this isn't gonna end well. And we open the places up and they smell. And this is a place that's just been renovated. And sure enough, we go through and we end up calling these people in California and telling them, like, I know your contractor, you spent this much money, you spent $20,000 on your contractor, but this hot water tank is not hooked up to code, and this is not done right, and this is not done right. And the guy had only kept them informed via YouTube videos. Like every week or whatever, they got another YouTube walkthrough of their property as the renovations were undergoing. And it's like, I'm all for doing some stuff hands-off, and I'm all for delegating, but that's just a little bit too much to purchase a place sight unseen, to have your contractor that you've never met do all this work, and to just rely on YouTube. That's pushing my comfort level, and I'm pretty risk tolerant. So that was a horror story there. So I ended up, of course, not buying those places. They weren't worth what they said they were, because the contractor had essentially ripped them off. So I found that flipping in Winnipeg was a good way for me to generate cash, and it lets me have a full-time job where I live. I'd like to encourage everyone here, if you're not already in it full-time, you can gradually work your way towards that. If that's what you want to do. If you love your day job, keep doing it. That's fine as well. But the thing I would say most of all is get a partner. Because if you don't have someone to do it with, if you're lucky and you have a spouse that's on board, hey, all power to you. I'd say beyond that, even if you and your spouse are on board together, get another partner. Get a partner who's outside of the marriage, because that's just, it's like when a married couple, they're almost like the same person, they're too tied together. So I'd encourage you to get somebody else who doesn't live in your house. But just get started. And we talked already, earlier, lots of stuff about funding deals. There's nothing in here that I really wanted to say other than that almost all my money is private. I've gotten I've got money from my friends, I got money from my family, we've got promissory notes out there, we got private mortgages, we've done everything but RSP, and that's just because we haven't gotten around to doing the paperwork yet. I've got seller financing, that's easy enough to find, you just ask for it. 1 in 10 will actually say sure, because they're motivated to sell. You know, if you're looking at the right properties, if you're looking at places where there's water damage and the ceiling has collapsed because they didn't clean out their eaves troughing for 5 years. Well, not many people want to buy a house where the ceiling's collapsed, so I can get a vendor take back. Somebody's foreclosing on a place where the person hasn't paid them their private mortgage in 2 years. They're motivated, they want to get out of the property. They'll give you 20% vendor take back so that you can go out there and then just get a conventional loan for the other 80%. And if you deal with the right lender and the right mortgage broker, that 20% is all the money you need to put down. So I just bought a house 100% financed. So the vendor's doing 20 and conventional lender will do 80. And I already have someone to sell it to when I'm done renovating it. My partner's wife is buying it for their niece. It's like, you know, there's my exit strategy. I already have the house sold. I haven't even bought it yet. But yeah, my buddy Troy that I mentioned on that first slide, he's a joint venture partner. He came in pre-qualified with a big fat, mortgage. So okay, right away we'll stick him as the first on there. Al goes out and gets a second, and there's our construction financing, and that's the house that we just finished the other day. And looking forward to having that one sell. So. But all my partners want to keep working with me because I pay well. The person who puts in the money gets half the deal. We pay everybody, my friend Rena, she's getting 12% on the construction financing she's giving to us. That's on a note. My mom, we're paying my mom 10% because she knows where I live. But hey, why wouldn't I ask my mother for money? She's like, I'm taking your sister and her kids to Disney World in spring break in March. So she goes, I need the money back by March. But what's she gonna do with the money between now and March? She'll get all of 1% at the bank. So why shouldn't I give my mom 10%? It's win-win. I get the money for some construction financing. My mom gets 10% on money that she would have got 1% on. The difference is, that pays for taking all the kids out for dinner when they're in Florida for like a week. So why not do that kind of stuff? You don't know if you don't ask. And I've, in the last year, I've taken to asking. And a lot of people approach me now that I didn't even realize. So everybody, knows somebody that has money that is very disappointed with the returns they're getting. Somebody's got an RSP that's lost money in the last 5 years. I mean, ultimately, almost everybody I know has lost money on their RSPs in the last 5 years.
I looked into getting RSP loans to go into the States, but from my understanding, you can't, it has to be a piece of Canadian, real property in Canada, on Canadian soil.
Yeah.
Finding RSP won't go to the state, other than doing it to yourself or whatever that, I'm not sure what that.
Yeah, well, that would work just fine for me because I have Winnipeg property too, so
Yeah.
take the, I've got money on the Winnipeg property that if you gave me money from your RSP onto my Winnipeg property, I can still pay you, and then I'll take the money, the equity that I had in my Winnipeg property, and I'll take my own equity then and go and put it on my Minneapolis property. So there's always a way to structure it if you've got property in both countries.
Right.
It can be done safely, it can be done legally. You just have to have a good power team that understands what you're trying to do. What else? Let's see. I think I've already talked about all this stuff. So, yeah. If anyone wants the slides, let me know.
Sure.
Certainly be willing to do that. I did want to make mention of Tony Jury. It's something that Farmer Logic is putting on. I did the videotaping for Tony in Vancouver where we did strategic planning and strategic life design. And I'm sticking around. It's not this weekend, it's the following weekend. But Tony is an exceptional trainer, and strategist. He's doing branding and marketing, which I believe is $2,500. He's doing negotiation, which is another $2,500, or you can come to both days for $3,000. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that is, yeah. Okay. The guys at the table at the back, I was very impressed. You know, I've seen a lot of people talk. I've gone to a lot of seminars. I've spent probably close to $80,000 across all those real estate courses that I've taken in my life. And I've spent another $100,000 getting an MBA. And Tony is up there with the very best people I've ever heard talk on this. And I can see why you can get $12,000 a day from somebody, you know, at Ford or Walmart. So yeah, no one I've ever met has lived his life with that much intention and that much planning. Almost everything he does is planned. Almost everything everyone does is in reaction to. We're just doing what we can to get through the day. He spends almost all of his time thinking about it first. It's pretty crazy. And he can teach you how to do a lot of that stuff too. So, anyway, you know, I know people have been very good about asking questions all the way along, but if anyone had anything at the end, again, there's a million things I didn't talk about. So if you're serious about US real estate investing, if you want to invest close to home, like again, I have friends who are invested in Rochester, which is close to where most of you live, and would be another similar to Minneapolis type market where you can get in a car and drive there instead of having to fly. I've got lots of contacts to lawyers, accountants, all that kind of stuff that, there's no sense in sharing it, having people scribble it down. If you want it, send me an email, pick up the phone, give me a call. And thank you very kindly. And thank you, Anthony, for having me.
Appreciate it. I know it's been a long night. Thank you very much, everybody, for hanging in there. I get 2 more giveaways. We'll do them really quick, and then you can hang around or head back. But thanks.